Nominative case is used for two things, which is essentially only one thing. That's the subject and predicate nominatives. The subject of the sentence is whatever it is that's doing the action of the sentence. That's why you have to conjugate your verb to go with your subject, because those two things are intermingled. They have to go together. So obviously the subject is what's doing the action. If I am is your verb, and the subject is then I. If you use something that you would have like an equal sign between the subject and the object, and those would still make sense, that is then a predicate nominative. So things like I am, you are, any forms of being in English or in German. So things like ich bin ein Mann. Nominative case on both sides of it, because if you put an equal sign between I and man, I equal man. Yes, I am a man, and therefore those two things are the same. This works with a couple of different verbs that we've had so far this year. We have 4 of them. 2 of them are pretty common, and the rest of them don't really work out all that often. The first one is obviously forms of sein, very common. Whatever it is on both sides of that noun or of that verb are going to be in the nominative case. Anytime that you have a form of werden when it's not used with the future tense. So whenever werden means to become or to turn into. So for instance, ich werde ein Schmetterling, the example I always give. If it's ich werde ein Schmetterling, that is an equal sign between those two would still make sense. I am butterfly or I become butterfly. I equal butterfly. I and the butterfly are the same thing, so we have a predicate nominative. Those are always going to be nominative. That's sein and werden. You also have bleiben, which is very rarely used, but if you were a man and you remain a man, or if you're Pinocchio, for instance, I'm a real boy, and then you continue to be a real man afterwards, or a real boy afterwards, then you would say, ich bleibe ein Junge, I remain a boy. It's not as common, but it can be done, and it would be used as a predicate nominative in that case. The other one is kind of irrelevant that it's a predicate nominative, and that is heißen. Heißen is used like, I am called whatever, and the whatever I'm called is generally not going to take a der word or a ein word, so it doesn't matter that it's accusative. But you would say things like, I am called Bob. Ich heiße Bob. Bob and ich are both in the nominative case because heißen is one of those things that's going to take a predicate nominative. Most of the time that one's irrelevant that it's even nominative. The accusative case is the second case that we used. I don't know why I'm spelling it in German, but whatever, that's fine. The accusative case is used with direct objects. So whatever it is that's receiving the object. Whatever it is that's receiving the action of the sentence. So if I kick something, the something that I kick is the direct object. If I throw something, the something that I throw is the direct object. If I buy something, the something that I buy is the direct object. Anything that is being verbed. So if it's receiving the action of the verb, that's your direct object. It also answers the question of what. So if you say things like, what are you buying? The what that you're buying is the direct object. Same thing happens in German, where you would have, was kaufst du? What are you buying? The was is your direct object, even though it's a question word. If you answer that question, ich kaufe ein Buch. Ein Buch is the thing being bought, and therefore is in the accusative case. Most of the time, again, that's still irrelevant that it's accusative, unless it's masculine. If it's masculine, things like einen Krimi, for instance. Ich kaufe einen Krimi. It's einen Krimi because it's accusative and it's masculine. Same thing would happen if you had, I'm buying the dog. Ich kaufe den Hund. I'm buying den Hund because it's the direct object and it's accusative. Accusative case is also used for 5 prepositions that we talked about in this class. That is für, durch, ohne, and gegen. Gegen. One too many G's. Für is used as for, as in I'm doing this for that. Like, oh, ich mache das gern für dich, for you, für dich, für mich, for me. Anything that's for in English is going to be translated more than likely as für in Deutsch. Is around whenever you're talking about an object. So if I'm walking around a table, if I'm just doing circles around a table, that's einen Tisch. Or if I go around a corner, that's die Ecke. Or around in any type of a solid object type of sentence. If you're talking about time, it's kind of irrelevant that it's accusative most of the time, but it's still like 3 Uhr at 3 o'clock, or 4 Uhr, 4 o'clock. Any of those type of things, that's going to be using and at that point it means at. So at this time as opposed to around that time. Durch means through, as in through the looking glass, or whatever other version you want to use. Durch. And it's used with things like durch die Stadt, through the city, or durch die Schule, through the school, or durch das Geschäft, through the store. Any of those type of things, again, it's going to be used with an accusative object. Whatever is after the preposition is going to be accusative. Ohne is without, as in ohne dich, without you, or ohne mich, without me, or ohne ein Buch, without a book, or ohne den Krimi, without the detective story, because that comes up in the textbook like 12 million times. Gegen is against, so things like Gegen die Wand, which is a German film that I've never seen, or things like gegen ihn, against him, like if you're for something or you're against something, like I'm for dogs, I like dogs, so you'd be like, ich bin für Hunde, I like dogs, or I'm for dogs. If you're against dogs, like, no, more dogs, you would say, ich bin gegen Hunde. So I'm against dogs. That's the way that you can use gegen. Yes, sir? The other time that you use the accusative case we never actually talk about, and that is time elements. For the reason that it's guten Morgen, the reason it's guten Morgen as opposed to guter Morgen is because it's accusative. Time elements are always going to be accusative unless you get to some hypothetical things that happen to be the genitive case, but that's German too. So anyway, if you're using a time element, something like heute Morgen. Heute Morgen is in the accusative case. You just don't care that it's accusative, so that's why we don't generally talk about it. It's kind of irrelevant that it is, but it's on the list. The last case that we get in this class is dative, or the dative case. And the dative case is used with indirect objects. The main one, anyway, is the indirect object. Indirect objects are what's receiving the direct object. So if I buy something, the something I buy is your direct object. The for whom I am buying it is the indirect object. So, for instance, ich kaufe meiner Mutter ein Buch. I'm buying my mother a book. My mother is the one receiving the book, and therefore is the indirect object. It's indirectly affected by the verb. You can have a direct object without having an indirect object, but you can't have an indirect object without having a direct object, because you can't have something to whom or for whom the direct object is without having a direct object for it to be for or with or whatever. You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense. You can't do it. So you have to have a direct object in order to have an indirect object, except with dative verbs. And that's where it gets kind of confusing when you have the dative verbs helfen, passen, stehen, gefallen, danken, and I'm missing one. Glauben, that's the one I need. These are the 6 that are actually in your textbook, which is why I leave those on there instead of things like gratulieren and some other ones that would actually be pretty common. These are the 6 that are in your textbook, and they take dative objects. So what normally you would think, like, if I help someone, in English you would think help is the verb, and I am the subject, which makes me nominative, so the thing that I'm helping, in this case a person, would be the direct object. But because helfen in German is a dative verb, the object of the dative verb is automatically dative, because dative verb, that's kind of where they get their name. So, you would say things like, ich helfe dem Mann. It's dem Mann because it's dative case, so we have to have the dem as opposed to den, which would be the accusative one. Yes, ma'am?
So when it has like one of those verbs, it can be dative?
Yes, anytime that you have one of these verbs, the object of that verb is going to be dative. What normally you would think is the direct object is now a dative object instead, just because that verb. And there are only 6 that are on your exam. The other time that you have these dative case used is with the prepositions aus, außer, bei, mit, nach, seit, von, zu. We also have gegenüber, but gegenüber is not in your textbook, and so we don't talk about that one. Aus meaning out of or from. If you're building something out of something, like I'm building a sandbox out of wood, that would be aus Holz, because that's out of wood. If you come from a place like ich komme aus Edwardsville, I'm from Edwardsville, then that would be using aus. Generally speaking, it's used just with places, like I come from this place, but you can't say things like I'm getting a letter from my mother using aus, because that would be like you're pulling the letter out of your mother's stomach, and that would just be awkward for everyone involved. Außer is except, as in like außer mir, except for me. So things like Alle meine Freunde gehen ins Kino. All of my friends are going to the movies. Außer Jim. Everybody except for Jim. Sorry, Jim. So, außer is used in that type of situation. It can also be used besides things like außer einem Bruder hat Holger auch eine Schwester. So besides having a brother, Holger also has a sister. Those type of sentences using besides. Things like außer einem Hund hat auch eine Katze. Besides having a dog, he also has a cat. Any of those are going to be using außer. By is used at whenever it's used with people and their houses. So if you're at a person's house, you are by and then that person's name. So by Jim, because I just keep using Jim's name. So by Jim or by meinen Eltern or something like that, like at my parents' house, that's by. It's used with a couple of other weird instances, but at is the most common one that at least shows up in your textbook. Things like I work at a place, that's going to be using by, or it's also used while, but that's German 2 stuff whenever it's used with gerunds. So the main ones that you need to know about are at. Mit is used with, which is why by gets confused. Sometimes they say by translates as with, but if you translate by as used with, then you have a problem with mit. And besides that, whenever you say things like, I'm at my parents' house, you say bei meinen Eltern as opposed to with my parents, which would be mit meinen Eltern. So like if you're going to get ice cream with your parents, that would be mit meinen Eltern because you're not at their place, you're going somewhere else with them. So mit is used with. It's only used as with, just mit. Nach is used after or towards. It's used towards whenever you're going to a place that is bigger than a city or larger. So nach Chicago, nach Berlin, nach Edwardsville, nach Illinois, nach wherever, as long as it's a city or larger. The exception to that rule, of course, is whenever you're saying nach Hause, which is towards home, or to your house or to your dwelling. That's nach Hause. That's the only exception to that rule. Nach is also used after, as in nach dem Film, after the film, or nach der Schule, after school, or nach dem Studieren, after the studying, or whatever it is that you want to use there, that's nach. Seit is since, as in like seit einer Woche, since a week ago. It's always used with the present tense whenever you're saying things that are still continuing on into the present tense. So things like seit einer Woche wohne ich hier. So since a week ago or for a week now, I have lived here. In English, we have to use have lived here, which is complicated, but in German, it's still the present tense because it's continuing on into the present tense. That, again, is going to be used with the dative case. Von is used as in from, as in ich habe einen Brief von meiner Mutter. I got a letter, or I have a letter from my mother. Or ich habe ein Geschenk von meinem Vater, or something like that. I got a gift, or I have a gift from my father. Zu is used to whenever it's anything inside of a city. There are a few exceptions, like ins Kino, to go to the movie theater, you go into it instead. But zu is used for things like zur Post, to the post office, or zum Kaufhaus, to the department store, or something like that. Zu Hause is, again, the exception to that rule, because then you have the opposite of nach Hause and zu Hause. Zu being at home, nach being going towards home. Von is whenever you're receiving something from someone, that's correct. Aus is used whenever it's out of. If you can translate it as out of and it doesn't sound creepy, it's probably going to be using aus. If you say from and from is the only way to translate it, it's probably von. The general rule anyway. So those are your 3 cases that we have. It doesn't really make much sense until you actually have some background to it. So knowing these cases is only part of the battle.